Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Quarter Deck, the podcast that takes you deep into the heart and the soul of the United States Marine Corps. I am your host, Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Saenz, better known as the Gunny, and I am thrilled to have you along for another episode packed with Marine Corps tales and the incredible stories of our brothers in arms. Today, we're going to take a look at our book with the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Better Friend, No Worst Enemy. And we're going to take a look at now as RCT-5 is now just waiting for the clearance for them to initiate their attack as they're going to go ahead and move forward towards Tikrit past Baghdad. In our hero highlights today, we look at the Medal of Honor recipient of First Lieutenant Carl Robert Rowe. So lace up your boots, turn up the volume, and join me, Gunny Saenz, as we look back into history on the Quarter Deck, where this is not just a podcast, but this is a Marine Corps experience. So get ready to be inspired, motivated, and filled with unmistakable Marine Corps pride. Hurrah! Welcome to the Quarter Deck with Gunny Saenz.
Drop and give me 25. I'm the Gunny.
It's time for the gunning.
The Quarter Deck. Lights. Get online right now. You got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Hello, my bunch of knuckle-dragging, beer-drinking, hard-charging devil dogs. You're listening to the Quarter Deck. I am your host, Miguel, the Gunny Saenz.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear. That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
The Quarter Deck. Last week we talked about, why I decided to listen to the Marine Corps, but this week, what I want to talk about a little bit is how that whole entire process came about of me deciding to do what I wanted to do. It all started really back when I was in Germany, when we were down there in 90, 91, 92 timeframe. My dad was stationed over there in Germany, in Bamberg, Germany. In case you guys don't remember, my dad was in the Army for almost 18 years before he retired with the early retirement program that was being offered during that time after Operation Desert Storm. Now, during that time, I decided to take JROTC starting in the 8th grade. I started with the JROTC program, and that kind of got me interested in the military way of life and stuff. Now, during that time, that JROTC program that was there at the school during that time was an Army JROTC program. And, that didn't hold me back or anything else because I learned a little bit more about what was going on. So after that, taking JROTC, when I was in junior high, we moved to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where they also had a JROTC program. So I went ahead and continued that as a freshman. Now, since I've already had a year of JROTC when I was down there in Germany, they decided to, kind of put me a little bit more advanced. And I believe they promoted me to corporal. I'm not really too sure what rank I was once I got there. But again, this was another Army JROTC program, which, I was excited to get involved into because I took part of working with them in the extracurricular programs through JROTC, which was the color guard, the drill team, the fancy drill team, all those things. And we got to go to different competitions and things like that for us to be able to earn different kinds of awards. And it was exciting for us to be able to go down there and do those kinds of things. But it was after that, during my junior year, that I moved over to North Hartland High School, and that is where I continued with the JROTC program. Because if you guys remember in the 90s, that is when General Colin Powell decided that it was important to have JROTC in a lot of the high schools throughout the United States because it would help young men and women to develop leadership skills in order for them to make them better citizens in life once they decided to graduate from high school. So I continued that program throughout the whole entire time that I was in high school. And it wasn't until my junior year that's when I met my recruiter, Gunnery Sergeant Tracy Freeman. That's when I met him, and I kind of sat down with him and started talking about everything. And yes, I sat down, did those little tiles where they sort of the little areas of leadership, what I wanted to do and all that stuff. But I decided to do that. And then, long story short, that's when I enlisted into the Marine Corps. So that's what kind of led to that. But it's just the fact that it took him forever to actually convince me to actually go into the DEP program, which I was part of the DEP program for almost a year. That is a freaking long time for me to be in there. Now, the one thing that, we got to remember, and those of us that enlisted in the Marine Corps, we know, or any branch of service, as a matter of fact, that once you get to the MEP stations, you have that final moment of truth where they ask you all the questions about you doing anything or having anything on your record and so forth. And when I got there, I'm one of those. I caved in because when they asked me if there was anything else that maybe I hadn't told my recruiter about that I have gone throughout my time growing up before now, that I wanted to enlist into the service. And, I pretty much just spoke up and told them that, hey, I had gone to counseling because of alcohol when I was in high school. And that was because when we went on a JROTC program, we were like an idiot. I decided to take a bottle of Mad Dog 2020. Now, I wasn't the only one that was drinking during that time, but I took the rap for everybody. I didn't rat nobody out. I didn't do anything. So with that, they ended up having to send me to see a freaking wizard, a psychiatrist, a therapist, whatever you want to call it, to find out if I still had an issue with alcohol and all that stuff, to make sure that I was fit to actually enlist into the Marine Corps. So here I go, enlisted in the Marine Corps now, and I have a freaking psych waiver in order to be able to actually enlist into the Marine Corps and actually progress through all that stuff. Now, with the Marine Corps, I think the most iconic thing that I remember at this point in time was, like everybody else, the iconic yellow footprints of actually standing on those yellow footprints. And now when I went into the Marine Corps, when I actually left from the MEP stations, it was on September 6th of 1995. And that's when I left to actually go into boot camp. Now, I went to Parris Island, South Carolina. And those of you that went to boot camp in Parris Island in South Carolina know how humid and how hot it is down there in South Carolina. Not to mention the freaking sand fleas. Those little bastards are, relentless. They will find a way to get to you and bite you no matter where, somewhere in places that you never even thought that they can get into to actually, bite you. And these little fleas, man, it's almost like they got a whole freaking set of canine teeth on them because they hurt. And, but that's a different story for a different podcast. But let's get back to on track. So I can remember that finally when I was done with my psych waiver, when I was done with all that stuff, and I was finally able to leave to head down to Parris Island. Our recruiter took us down there the day before we were getting ready to leave, and we stayed at a hotel overnight along with all the other pulleys that were actually getting ready to leave to their respective, branches of service. So they dropped us off at the MEP station. Then they bussed us over to the hotel, which they took us over to a Howard Johnson, or a Hojo's, as we like to call it. So we spent the night there, and the next morning was when they actually drove us all to the airport to get dropped off to get ready to go. Now, there was about 8 of us that went in my little group, and one of the pulleys that was going there, he's the one that had all the paperwork for all of us to make sure that we had everything that we needed. So once we got down there to recruit training, we can just give it to the drill instructors or the processing center to ensure that we were ready to go and get processed to get into our designated platoons to go in and start recruit training. Now, the plane ride for me, it wasn't extremely bad, but, it kind of makes you think, okay, now I'm going. I'm really leaving. I'm going to go ahead and go do this, and I'm going to go ahead and spend my next 13 weeks being trained to be a United States Marine. So it was an experience, and it was exciting for me to be able to do this. First time I really was on my own, getting ready to travel to far away and do these things that I wanted to do. But as soon as we got to the airport, down there in South Carolina. They took us down there to the USO where they had a little setup room there for us and everything. And there was a Marine that was there that was pretty much our liaison that was there with us to make sure that we made it to where we needed to go. He said, go ahead and get over here, take some time. Here's some lunch. Gave us a freaking hoagie, a sandwich, a juice, and a little bag of potato chips. He told us to go ahead and make sure that we ate because it's going to be a little while before we get the opportunity to eat again, and to take a nap, go to sleep, because we were not going to be able to get any sleep for a while once we left and actually headed down there to South Carolina. So we headed down there, and finally the bus showed up to pick us up. And we got there like around 10 in the morning that we got to the airport in South Carolina. And the bus did not come pick us up to almost 10 o'clock at night. Now, by that time, we had a couple of buses. There was a total of 3 buses full of Marines that were heading down there to South Carolina. So they've loaded us up on the bus. And, we had not met any drill instructor. The only Marines that we really met were the ones that were at the airport. And they were just basically Marines that were there getting ready to receive all these pulleys that were getting ready to go down there to the depot. So once we finally got onto the bus, it was, man, it seemed like it was a long time. It was hours and hours of us driving for us to actually get to Paris Island from the airport. At the airport to Paris Island, it's not very far at all. But what the bus drivers did was they literally drove us around everywhere so that we really had no idea to where we were actually going. Now, the next thing was that we got to actual Paris Island and we were getting ready to go through the front gate to go into actual Paris Island. Now, this I can actually remember that for me, it was like I had an empty feeling inside of my gut because I was like, oh my goodness. You can see the eagle of an anchor and it's saying, welcome to Paris Island, South Carolina. And it was at that moment that I realized that, okay, there's no turning back now. Here we go. I'm going to do this, graduate, and then be able to go back home and do whatever else I needed to do or whatever else I was going to be capable of doing. Once we got there, then it was time for those iconic yellow footprints that we all know and remember. And as soon as we got there, the drone instructor gave you the spill, all the spill, the speech, and everything else that they give you. On behalf of the commanding general, blah, 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 we'd like to welcome you to Paris Island, South Carolina, where we afford you the opportunity to become a United States Marine. And then they go ahead and give you the instructions of what you're going to do, get off the bus, get on the yellow footprints, and get shoulder to shoulder, and make sure that you're aligned and ready to go. And then they give you the whole entire rest of the speech, tell you that through these doors you're going to get the opportunity to go through them only one time for you to be able to go those and earn that title of the United States Marine. Now, these doors are made out of brass or something, or actually something like that. And they have the eagle of an anchor on top. And, they have the description on top, through these portholes, past young men and outcome United States Marine and so forth. And so, it was kind of iconic to go through there. And we only went through those doors once because you get that opportunity to earn that title. And once you earn the title of a United States Marine, that title sticks around with you for the rest of your life. And I think that's one of the biggest differences in all the other branches of service, because once they get out of the service, they're done. They're no longer airmen. They're no longer soldiers and none of that stuff. For us, that title sticks with you for the rest of your life. You will always be a United States Marine because that is something that you earn and it's never going to go away. And I guess for the other branches of service, it's a little bit different because they don't have that same kind of mentality. I guess that's what they say, that when Marines go to recruit training, they get brainwashed. And, that's the way we live our whole entire time in the career that we are in the service. But that first night when we got to recruit training, as soon as we went through those doors, they set us down on these tables and made sure that we had all our paperwork. Some of the recruits that were in the front collected up all the packets. They took them to the back and started processing us to be able to make sure that we were checked in. And, they had us sitting there in a quiet room with nothing, just silence. Now, remember, we hadn't slept in a while. And we were there for the longest time. We got there. We took a urinalysis. They made sure that we signed all the paperwork that we needed to sign. They made sure that we got anything rid of any contraband that we might have taken with us. Cell phones. Well, not really cell phones because not everybody really had a cell phone during that time. Not too many people did anyway. But anything that you might have brought with you, you ended up having to leave there. Now, when we left, our recruiter told us, like, hey, do not take anything with you. Don't take a suitcase. Don't take any of that stuff like that, to make sure that you have as little as possible for you to carry there. And he was right, because during that time, they took everything. They took everything from you, from your clothes, from your shoes, any personal hygiene items. I think the only thing that they allowed people to keep was if some people took some whitey tighties, they were allowed to keep those because they were going to be able to use them there while they were there in recruit training. But they got all that stuff. We put everything inside of boxes, and they took those away and put them in a room, and they store them in a little supply area by platoon numbers and companies to ensure that we get those back when it's almost time for us to graduate. Now, for me, I got there during that time in September, and I was assigned to Fox Company, platoon 2045. And my drill instructors, you Marines will know that you would never, ever, ever forget the names of your drill instructors, because for me, for the rest of my life, they will be embedded, because they're the ones that taught me to be a United States Marine, and they are going to be embedded in my brain housing group for the rest of my life. Senior Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Villarreal, Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Watkins, Drill Instructor Sergeant Boggs, and Drill Instructor Sergeant Donnelly. Those four are the ones that are responsible for making me earn the title of United States Marine. So if you're anything like me, you're never going to forget who they are. And, that's basically what happened there. We got done with all that stuff, And during receiving, which was a total of, we were there for 3 days for receiving while the rest of the other Marines showed up for the company, all that stuff there. So we got processed, we got issued our uniforms, we got everything that we needed to do inside of our little sea bags and in squad bays as we waited for everybody else to come there for us to actually get picked up and get ready to go to start our training with Fox Company. So if any of you have any stories or anything that you want to share with us as far as your experiences when you went through recruit training, remember you can go to our Facebook page, The Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs, and you can also follow us on TikTok to go down there, the Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs on TikTok as well as our YouTube channel, The Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs. Jump on there, check it out. You're going to make sure that we see our actual video clips podcast that we have on there, that we post on there every single week, as well as don't forget that our podcast is broadcast every Thursday on all the podcasting applications that are out there. So make sure you look for us, like us, so you subscribe and know when the new episodes are going to pop up on the broadcasting applications. Are you looking for a photographer who can capture the most important moments in your life? Look no further than Miguel Signs Photography. Miguel Signs is an award-winning photographer with a passion for capturing the beauty and emotions of weddings, family portraits, and special events. With years of experience and a creative eye, Miguel Signs will create stunning images that you'll treasure for years to come. Whether you're looking for a traditional wedding album, a unique family portrait, or a professional headshot for your business, Miguel Signs Photography has the expertise to bring your vision to life. From the initial consultation to the final product, Miguel Signs will work with you every step of the way to ensure that your images reflect your unique style and personality. Don't settle for mediocre photographs that simply document an event. Trust Miguel Signs Photography to create timeless images that capture the essence of your special moments. Book your session today and experience the magic of Miguel Signs Photography. Visit Miguel Signs Photography online at miguelsignsphotography.com to see examples of his work and schedule your appointment today.
What we're gonna do right here is go back, way back into time.
This week in our reading of our book, With the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worse Enemy, we're going to go ahead and continue with our following of RCT-5 and what they're actually getting prepared to do. Now, last week, we talked about how they were getting ready for the coming ground attack that they were preparing for to ensure that the 1st Marine Division was going to be successful in what they were going to be doing. Now, this week, all RCT-5 is doing now is they're waiting for clearance for them to be able to actually execute the mission that they were planning for to make sure that they're going to be successful. So let's go ahead and get into and see what the division and what RCT-5 had on their minds for whatever they planned on doing this time during the campaign. The CG now convened his planners and asked them to assess the current situation. Did the quality of the route and our success in achieving operational surprise now make it possible for the entire division to move up Highway 1? The staff reviewed the requirements to send a force up Highway 7 corridor and decided that there was still tactical advantage to be gained by sending RCT-1 along that route. The paramilitary had reportedly been using a number of smaller cities just north of Al-Nazariya to rally their resistance fighters, clearing the rat's nest at Al-Gharaf and Al-Sharaf especially would force the enemy fighters to focus their attention on saving their own skin, not contributing to mischief in Al-Nazariya and other southern cities along Highway 7. In addition, the reported presence of chemical weapons in Al-Sharaf posed a significant risk to the division and the following on forces massed near Highway 1 bridge in that crossing. The use of the eastern ridges in the Al-Nazariya was recommended as a means to remove their threats and alleviate the pressure of forces moving up Highway 1 corridor, dispersing the lucrative chemical target that the division would otherwise present. There was also a consistent bias to use multiple avenues of approach wherever it was possible, to preserve flexibility and eliminate the need for a major friendly passage of lines, with the inherent friction that would entail in that event. Finally, the Baghdad RG Infantry Division and Al-Qut would have to remain fixed if the Marines were to close rapidly on Baghdad. And RCT-1 moving up Highway 7 was planned to be this force. The division had long looked at the bridges of eastern Al-Naziriyah as highly desirable as a route of march. There were two key bridges at the eastern edge of the city, a southern one over the Euphrates River and a northern one over the Saddam Canal. The intact seizure of the bridges by RCT-2, the CG of TF Tarwa, was welcome news. RCT-1 was issued a frago sending it over newly seized bridges and up Highway 7. The other criteria for moving across these bridges, however, was a secure route that would support RCT-1's movement north through Tarwa's lines. This was to pose a major challenge. As the Al-Naziriyah urban area was anything but benign, the 4-kilometer stretch between the bridges was subject to the fires of direct attack of regime fighters that continued to operate in the city. In Al-Naziriyah, the battle to hold the eastern bridges continued to earnest. RCT-2 had battled the enemy elements that had chosen to stand and fight in the city. Tasked with opening the bridges of the east side of Al-Naziriyah, RCT-2 had encountered stiff enemy resistance and had taken many casualties. The Fedayeen had rallied and massed themselves against RCT-2's assault. Air assets from across the Mef had been concentrated in support of any sharp Naziriyah fight. From positions along Highway 1 south of the Euphrates, the columns of 1st Marine Division waiting to cross the river could hear and see air artillery effects in the city. The division's Marines cheered their comrades and reflected on the coming fight in Al-Qut and in Baghdad, as the rest of the 1st Marine Division was pushing up Highway 1 to the west. RCT-1 poised itself to push through Al-Naziriyah in order to gain access to Highway 1 and conduct its fixing attack on Baghdad Republican Guard Division in Al-Qut. On 24 March, the division's reconnaissance battalion was tasked to establish by the fire precision of RCT-1's planned river crossing over the eastern bridges. Recon battalions set in their positions and engaged in a significant firefight with enemy elements on both sides of the Euphrates River. Deconflicting to the battle space was difficult, as 1st Marine Division's forces were providing supporting fires to Task Force Tarawa's zone. The Marines of 1st Recon Battalion poured withering fire across the rivers in support of RCT-2's attack. At sunset, they were ordered to fall back and make their preparations for their movement north for the next day. That evening, 2nd LAR Battalion, Barbarian, led by Lieutenant Colonel Ed Ray, the division's lead element in the attack of Highway 7, passed through Al-Naziriyah and over the two eastern bridges. Barbarian pushed through with blinding speed. Their impetuous attack allowed a swift passage to the northern bridge, but not without some significant fighting along the way. As soon as they crossed the southern bridge, they began taking fire from the Fedayeen fighters that were firing AK-47s and RPGs from windows and alleyways. Barbarian returned fire against the enemy while continuing their movement towards the northern bridge. They could see the enemy fighters on top, between the inside of the multitude of buildings and alleyways in the darkness. Barbarian returned fire at the side of muzzle flashes or rocket trails as they rapidly moved through the urban terrain. The aggressiveness, speed, and tenacity of the Marines was an awesome display of sheer will to accomplish the mission and take the fight directly to the enemy. Once across the northern bridge, the task force pushed north up Highway 7 and sporadic fighting continued. 2nd LAR Battalion was able to push up as far as Al-Gharaf, 15 kilometers north of Al-Naziriyah, by that evening. The desire was to get as far north as possible to make room for the remainder of RCT-1 to pass through Al-Naziriyah and onto Highway 7 route by morning. During the night, intelligence report revealed an Iraqi counterattack force heading south from Al-Qut, and Barbarian again proved their valor at ensuing meeting engagements. So as we can see, now was the actual fight going through actual Route 7 while the rest of the division and everybody else waited on Highway 1. Now, for us, I can remember that we were the ones that were waiting there on Highway 1 in that gigantic traffic jam that the division was now in because, we were waiting for those bridges so we can go ahead and go across and head the way that we were going to go to head into Baghdad. And even though we were stopped there, we had to maintain our vigilance and still continue to provide fire support to the rest of the division, especially to LAR, as they were moving forward because they needed the support because all those Fedayeen fighters that were now there fighting for Saddam Hussein were in their way. So we needed to provide the support, clear the way for them to ensure that they could accomplish their mission. Hero highlight. First Lieutenant Rowe had been moving his mortar platoon near the top of a small coral ridge in preparation for digging in for the night. According to a field dispatch from Staff Sergeant James F. Moser Jr., a Marine Corps combat correspondent, First Lieutenant Rowe decided to inspect an apparently empty Japanese dugout before permitting his men to use it. A few minutes before, a flame-throwing squad had blasted fire into the position. Near the entrance, two of the enemy lay dead. First Lieutenant Rowe could hear nothing. He stepped over the pair and into the dark interior, his carbine at the ready. Creeping along the wall, he could see stores of supplies. He saw no life. Suddenly, a shot rang out, hitting the lieutenant in his left side. He stumbled back to his men outside. Several Japanese followed, throwing grenades. Fragments filled the air. One grenade landed close to the lieutenant and two of his men. There was no escape, for the Japanese had held it too long to be thrown back. Despite his weakened condition, Rowe shoved his two comrades to the ground to save them from flying fragments. He dropped his carbine and dove for the grenade. He was down to his elbows and one knee when the grenade exploded. His abdomen and chest caught the blast, and he sank to the ground. None of his men were hit. Still conscious, Rowe could half hear and see the rest of the fight. Tommy gun rounds rang out, killing the remaining Japanese survivors. One of his men stood over him. First Lieutenant Rowe's body was pock-marked by the grenade blast. One steel fragment had passed through his left lung and lodged near his heart. Other fragments sprayed his chest, left side, and left arm. Still under enemy artillery and mortar fire, he was given first aid by a passing doctor and was carried back to a casualty evacuation point. "This was a miserable trip," he said. "I thought they would get all the men with me, but somehow we made it." Following his evaluation from Peleliu, he was hospitalized and later honorably retired from active duty. For those actions, Rowe was presented the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman at the White House ceremony on June 15, 1945, which included presentations to the fellow Marine recipients Everett P. Pope and Luther Skaggs Jr., as well as the Army recipient Gino J. Morelli, for their heroism during actions in the Central Pacific and the European theaters. He was promoted to captain in the reserves upon his retirement. He died December of 1977 in Lindenwood, New Jersey. First Lieutenant Carlton R. Rowe, United States Marine Corps Reserve, for service as set forth in the following citation. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while attached to the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division, during action against enemy Japanese forces on Peleliu Island, Peleliu Group, 15 September 1944. Before permitting his men to use an enemy dugout as a position for an 81mm mortar observation post, First Lieutenant Rowe made a personal reconnaissance of the pillbox and upon entering was severely wounded by the Japanese rifle fire from within. Emerging from the dugout, he was immediately assisted by 2 Marines to a less exposed area, but while receiving first aid, was further endangered by the enemy grenade which was thrown into their midst. Quickly, to act in spite of his weakness condition, he lurched to a crouching position and thrust both men aside, placing his own body between them and the grenade, taking the full blast of the explosion himself. His expeditional spirit of loyalty and self-sacrifice in the face of almost certain death reflects the highest credit upon First Lieutenant Rowe and the United States Naval Service.
The quarterdeck.
It's hard to believe that it is June 20th. And I want to thank everybody for joining me on this week's episode of The Quarterdeck. As a reminder, The Quarterdeck is now being broadcasted on all of the podcasting applications that are out there. We also have our Facebook page, The Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs, our YouTube channel, The Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs, and our TikTok channel, The Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs. You can come on there, watch all of our short little video clips that we have on there on TikTok, as well as now our video podcast that is being recorded and posted onto our YouTube channel. So if any of you are interested in the YouTube channel, head out there, like, subscribe, so we can get more people to follow us along in our video. And as well, here on our podcasting applications, we put on a new episode every single Thursday at 0811. So make sure that you subscribe and like our podcast so you are notified of when our new episode is now being posted. So as we move along with our reading of our book, man, you guys got to realize that things are starting to get more hectic a little bit more, because now the fighting is becoming to get a little more intense. So continue to come with us every single week as we continue to progress on the story of the 1st Marine Division and everything that they accomplished. And again, those of you that were there with me during that time, going through Anazaria, Camp Diarrhea, Camp Matilda, all those areas that we talked about, jump on in, send me a message, whether it's on TikTok, on YouTube, or our Facebook page. Let me know what's going on so I can go and bring you on here. We can bring you in, whether it's on Zoom or whatever, and do a recording of the podcast to bring you in as a guest for our show. So if you have any questions, concerns, or anything like that, be sure that you reach out to us on any of our platforms that are available to you now. So until then, I want to thank you again. Have a great weekend. Enjoy it with your family. And until next week, this is Miguel, the Gunny Signs, sounding Liberty Call.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.